Welcome to the channel about news from around the world. While you subscribe and like it, we're going to start.
US Treasury Chief Janet Yellen is flying to China this week. As with the recent visit to Beijing by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, few expect a breakthrough. Nevertheless, the fact that the world's two largest economies are discussing their many differences and trying to responsibly manage their differences is in itself perceived positively. At the same time, the Chinese have repeatedly made it clear that they do not accept the American attempt to divide relations with Beijing into different and supposedly unrelated tracks, believing that the dialogue between the two powers should be considered as a whole. Read more about why Washington is sending another politician to China and what will come of it. Back in May, it was known that the Joe Biden administration was trying to arrange a series of visits to Beijing by its top officials as part of an effort to re-engage with China. In particular, they were talking about Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Janet Yellen, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo and Climate Envoy John Kerry going there. That said, unofficial information suggested that the Chinese side would prefer to engage with the US first on economic issues. A US official admitted at the time, admitting that perhaps Raimondo and Yellen could visit China before Blinken. In the end, however, the first meeting did go to the Secretary of State. He visited Beijing and met with two top Chinese diplomats, the head of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission of the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee and the head of the Foreign Ministry, and was also received by Chinese President Xi Jinping. At the end of the visit, both sides described the talks as frank, substantive and constructive, but the trip was predictably not rich in concrete outcomes. Nevertheless, the sides agreed to maintain contact. Yellen's visit to China will be a logical continuation of that decision. According to the U.S. Treasury Department, the head of the agency will discuss the importance of responsible management of our relations as the world's two largest economies, direct communication on issues of concern and joint work to solve global problems. The official announcement of the visit made by the Chinese side on July 3 was even more succinct. The four-day visit will begin on Thursday and will include meetings with senior officials, the Chinese Ministry of Finance said. At the very least, Yellen is getting to know her new counterpart, Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, who has established a good personal relationship with the treasurer and has often been seen talking to Yellen unassisted, such as at the Davos Forum in Switzerland this winter. Fortunately, Liu He, a Harvard graduate, is fluent in English. Whether or not the US Treasury Chief and the new Chinese interlocutor develop a similarly positive dynamic is likely to be the subject of intense scrutiny by analysts. Back in April, Janet Yellen gave a keynote speech outlining three economic priorities in the US-China relationship: safeguarding national security interests, promoting mutually beneficial growth and cooperating on global issues such as climate change and the debt crisis. And while in Beijing, she will try to emphasize maintaining healthy ties between the world's two largest economies, even as national security concerns dominate the relationship. But convincing Beijing of the healthy attitude of the states will not be easy. Recently, Americans have begun to move away from the term decoupling to what they see as the softer term de-risking. The definition, coined by European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen, doesn't seek a full economic divorce from China, but rather a reduction in trade and economic vulnerabilities from the world's second-largest economy by relying on friendlier countries to manufacture critical materials, like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals and batteries for electric cars. But such semantics did not seem convincing to the Chinese. At the recent World Economic Forum in Tianjin, Chinese Premier Li Qiang criticized Western efforts to reduce China's role in global supply chains and the very rhetoric of the US and its allies on risk reduction, saying that they were engaged in politicizing economic issues. Moreover, Yellen's visit will come amid preparations by the US administration to impose new restrictions on US investment in Chinese technology industries. And this despite the fact that the U.S. has previously imposed legal hurdles on shipments of high-tech chips to Beijing, involving Japan and the Netherlands. Beijing did not swallow the resentment in silence, although it waited a considerable amount of time before taking countermeasures. On July 3, the same day Chinese authorities officially confirmed Yellen's visit, they also announced export restrictions on two metals, gallium and germanium, which are crucial for the production of semiconductors and other electronic components. In doing so, the Chinese essentially mirrored the American motivation, stressing that it was being done to protect the national security and interests of China. It should be noted that the Americans import 53% of gallium and 54% of germanium from China, and this move will be painful for them. A potentially problematic topic at the upcoming talks promises to be discussion of China's new counterintelligence law that went into effect on July 1. According to the US, it risks reclassifying routine business information gathering on PRC companies as punishable espionage and is fraught with negative consequences for foreign companies. This is while US companies operating in China have already complained about arbitrary inspections by the Chinese authorities, such as the recent investigations into two US consulting firms. Against this troubled backdrop, no one expects a breakthrough in US-China relations. Janet Yellen's trip would simply be the next step in an uncertain process, the former White House official noted in particular. Until the main issue of Taiwan is resolved, it is unlikely that the US-China relationship can be streamlined and fundamentally changed. The Chinese have a very tough stance on the issue. Taiwan is part of China, and the United States, which, although it acknowledged that position back in the 1970s, continues to supply arms to the island, which naturally violates Chinese sovereignty over the island. That said, Washington has not given up its demonstrative play of the Taiwan card even now, in the midst of efforts to bring relations with Beijing back to normal. The US State Department recently approved another $440 million arms shipment to Taipei. Last week, immediately after Antony Blinken's visit to China, a delegation of US congressmen, mostly from the Armed Services Committee of the lower house, arrived on the island. On the day Janet Yellen lands in Beijing to try to bring down the trade controversy, another delegation of 6 Republican congressmen will still be in Taipei. What Beijing thought of such contradictory US actions was very well written about back in April in a Xinhua commentary. These paradoxical statements and actions reflect an increasingly clear trend in Washington's policy towards China, to divide its relationship with Beijing into different categories, where it can take a containment, competition or cooperation approach according to America's needs. It is like extending one hand for a handshake and saying, "Let's work together," and then giving the other a slap in the face and expecting the person receiving the slap to just smile. Against this backdrop, one should not expect much of a smile from Janet Yellen on the Chinese side.
Thank you for watching. If you're interested, subscribe and leave a comment.